That's Loren Schoenberg on the tenor, Marcus Roberts on the piano, and I'm the vocalist. My name's Greg Clark. I'm from the College of Humanities and a professor of English. Marcus, as most of you know, is a premier jazz pianist and leader of the Marcus Roberts Trio. Loren is the artistic director of the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, a prolific band leader, currently plays a regular gig with the Christian, right, with the big band? With the Christian McBride, I lost McBride. Big band, which, don't tell him. What's this about? This is not a concert, this is school. It's still school day, so this is school. So don't get too comfortable and passive. This is active. What's the Civic jazz thing? That's probably what you're wondering. Well, let me tell you how I got here, and that might help. I remember when I was an early teenager growing up in the 60s, Top 40 radio, there was only AM radio, by the way. Top 40 radio was the thing that everybody listened to. So I listened to it. But my dad had a store that advertised clothing on a radio station called KEYY, which at that time, in the early 60s, had an all-jazz format. They survived on an all-jazz format for a number of years. And because I knew the announcers, because they would come to the store selling advertising time too, I would sometimes listen to them at night, and I started hearing this music. And it was music that made me feel grown up as I was listening to it. And as I listened to it, I kind of wanted to feel like that. And the Top 40 music didn't exactly do that. And that was my first encounter with jazz. So I always kind of liked it, but didn't know much. And then about 1998, 1999, my wife told me that the Wynton Marsalis and the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, which was its name then, was coming to BYU, to the Marriott Center, and that we were going. And I said, that's a big band, right? And she said, yes. And I said, I thought to myself, Glenn Miller? I don't really like that stuff that much. I like the small groups. But I went, and she was right. And one of the things that happened at that concert is that if you see a concert with that band, with Wynton Marsalis, he takes a lot of time in between tunes to talk about what's happening. And I began to learn what was happening in jazz, and he started talking about how jazz operates democratically. And that was something that caught my attention because I was in my own research and writing, I was looking at democratic culture and the difficulties with that. And I was also aware of the difficulties of that in America. So I contacted his office by email and said, do you have an archive with his notes or with his talks? And explained what I wanted, and this was Laura Johnson, wrote back and said, Winton wants you to call him. So I called him, and he was interested in the questions I was asking, and I ended up soon talking to him a few times and ended up at a thing called the Band Directors Academy in Aspen, where I met Loren. And then not soon after, Marcus came to BYU on a residency, and I ended up talking to him about my questions. And to my considerable and continuing surprise, they found my questions interesting and worth thinking about. And we've been talking about it ever since. What we talked about was, what can we learn from the way jazz operates about really crucial things in our lives, like equality. How do you live equality? Authority without undermining equality. About community. About how to be individuals and assertive individuals without damaging community. How to cooperate and at the same time compete. There was all these tensions that I saw being worked out productively in this music. And I think it's very important for us to learn how to live better together with people who we don't choose to live and work with, but people we're stuck with. Jazz, I think, has things to teach us about that. So what I would like to do is have this next hour be a clinic in what we can learn, what you might call civic lessons. And I'm not talking about government here. Government could definitely learn some things. Politics could learn some things from jazz. But I think the most important democracy we practice is face-to-face, interpersonally, in whatever organizational or group situation we find ourselves. That's where it begins. And maybe someday, if at the individual level we can develop that way of life, maybe it'll trickle up. But in the meantime, I think our lives are better because we live our lives in small groups. I think our lives are better if we learn some of these lessons. So I want you to help us extract the lessons. Did you notice anything, any lessons from It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing by Duke Ellington? This is class, this is school, this is participatory. We do have microphones because this is being videoed, and even if you can be heard in the house, we need you on the tape, or it's not tape, but, and so as you have something to say, raise your hand and the microphone will get to you very quickly. Allie, here comes a mic. It's like testimony meeting. You're on.
Okay, well, I liked sort of the shouts of affirmation between you two and in the audience when either of you played something that was just like really chilling inside, or something that like really struck you. You make a sound, and it's kind of like that's something that we're discovering together. You know, even though just one of you is playing it. Just that everyone's kind of appreciating it or noticing it. It's like we're working together to kind of come up with this sound. Or we're saying, hey, I really like that, keep doing that. I think that was interesting.
Do either of you want to elaborate on that, on what she's talking about?
Well, like Greg said, you know, jazz music is a community music and it's a participatory music. So I can guarantee you that when you hear jazz played live, either on record or if you're there, the audience has a lot to say about what happens with the music. That's why live jazz concerts always seem to have somehow a bit more energy and freedom than studio recordings. And of course, the other component is when you're in the studio, you can stop if you mess up. But in a concert, you can't. Or at least you shouldn't. And so I think that we kind of felt that energy from y'all, and I think it just gave us the the encouragement to just go ahead and express whatever we truly felt at the time. And that type of spontaneity, when it's real, people can tell.
And I'll just add in this, let me get a little comfortable with this thing. Hold on one second. An airplane?
There you go.
You're smiling, you're laughing. That's a good thing, right? Feel better?
Feel better when you listen to this stuff.
But anyway, one thing that Marcus just said really struck a note for me, which was
Feel
that
better?
We live in a
supposed to feel better
society
when you
that's
listen to this
increasingly
stuff.
passive. Sit at home, watch a television, somehow passivity. We don't need to leave the house as much as we used to have to hear music, to hear live music, to hear entertainment. You can just sit with your headphones on alone in a room, go online on your device and watch everything that ever happened that's ever been captured. And what happens in a situation like this, I think, which is that people all of a sudden confront the fact that something's happening right in front of their eyes, that's happening as it's happening, and that your participation is, how can I put it, it's your willingness to participate emotionally with us while we do it, and whether or not we can see you, whether or not you're snapping your hands or tapping your feet or whatever, we feel your involvement. And again, that just may sound like so much talk, but it really is true. Going into 40 years of playing this music, I can tell you that we feel it coming back from you. And it's important that you realize that, and that I think that in terms of our interaction just day to day, walking down the street, having empathy, seeing someone who's more fortunate or less fortunate than us. Who was saying that, living in a big city where you have homeless people, where I live, you get used to and you get accustomed to stepping over that person or walking by that person or not feeling any sense of responsibility or compassion or the need to do something. And believe it or not, I think that there's a link somewhere in between how we become deadened to that stuff in a certain sense. And when it comes to live performance, that I think for a lot of younger folks especially, I don't know how much of a difference there is between listening to something with headphones, isolated, listening to something in person. In fact, sometimes the in-person thing might seem almost inferior because it's not as loud. It's not bombarding your ears. So those are just thoughts that go through my mind. But I'm hoping that this will engender some questions. Hands, please, somebody. If not, I'm going to point to somebody.
Well, it's not a question, it's just an observation. I loved how if a seemingly mistake was made, it was just played upon and incorporated into the journey. And it's not about perfection, it was about the product and the experience. And what can I do with that? That's this life, it's not about
Do you have an application of that? Do you have a
perfection.
takeaway?
It's
You're not a
about
jazz
your
musician,
interactions
so what
with
can you
each
do with
other
that?
and how we do that and encourage and incorporate and learn from each other.
We kind of gave you a pop quiz because you didn't know you were going to be asked these questions. I think it'd be good, now that you know you're going to be asked these questions, in order to perform better on the next quiz, maybe we ought to have another chance. I continue to be amazed that I'm sitting here with them. I want to pose a question, a specific question, and get your comments, and then I'm going to back off controlling this thing, and you can start asking whatever you want. I want you to think about, well, Alexis de Tocqueville in 1841 and 1842, a Frenchman, took a 9-month tour of the then United States. 1840, it was just getting started. The Constitution had only been in place half a century, and then it was rickety. He said he had one observation and one profound worry. One observation was that the United States was designed to function on the basis of what he called voluntary association. That is, people had to organize themselves together in cooperative groups in order to get anything done. And all Americans by that time were assuming a right to equality. His worry was individualism. He said, if anything is going to make this system fail, if anything is going to ruin this attempt at a democratic nation, it will be the excess of individualism that he saw in Americans at the time. What happens to individualism in a jazz performance? Because if you don't have individualism operating, you're in trouble. But if you do have individualism operating too much, you're in trouble. There is music that basically calls for minimum individualism. But what happens to it? What can we learn about our own individualistic urges? Robert.
So I'm not trying to answer the question, but really ask the question, because as I was listening to you playing, one of the things I was asking myself is, what is the convention for when you step out and, I guess, I don't know if lead is the right word, but when you are taking the stronger part, and when you step back, and when you're sort of together on an equal plane? What's the convention in jazz?
Well,
where you,
for instance, that last performance,
what are you
a little bit of
reading
background
from each other about when
Marcus
you do
and I
that
did a
and when
tour
you don't do
together
that?
20 years ago, where he was a featured soloist in the Jazz and Lincoln Center Orchestra, and I was the conductor. And we went across the country, and that was 20 years ago. And although we bumped into each other here and there over the years, and I've been very aware of what he's been doing, we actually never played together. So until we came down here to start working with Greg yesterday, it was just a matter of, okay, boom, like I Ching, take the ice, the dice, I should say, whang. And for instance, that last performance, we never played that tune before. 5 minutes before we started, we were just taking the photograph here, and we were noodling, and we came up with, okay, we're going to play Willow Weep for Me. The way that it would have been played, conventionally speaking, would have been that one of us would have played the melody the whole time, and then someone else would take a solo, and then the other person would take a solo, and then we would maybe do something together, and then we would take out in time. We would all be very nicely diced up into even things. And although jazz is frequently thought of as a nonconformist kind of music, there's as much conformity in jazz as there is anywhere else. I can tell you in my wildest imagination, again, I mean, I'm 50, I'm gonna be 56, and so I've been playing for, 40 years or however long it is. I should sound better. But anyway, what I'm saying is that in my wildest imagination, I'd ever imagined a version of Willow Weep for Me like that, with the hot potato being tossed back 57 times. And I have to say that as a saxophone player, playing with Marcus Roberts, you have to understand this is not a typical interchange of how jazz usually happens. Because, I can say it, I feel funny saying it in front of him, but this is one of the great jazz pianists in the world. So it's like playing with a symphony orchestra that can spontaneously compose, react. So I want you to understand exactly what you're hearing up here. It's a lone soloist accompanied by a roving orchestra. So that's kind of what's happening. And then, Marcus, I don't know what you want to add to that, but
Well, well, the biggest thing in terms of determining the interchange, it's a lot like a conversation. You'll be talking to somebody, and one person's wanting to say something, but he never gets a chance because the other person won't stop talking, right? So what we try to do is avoid doing that. So you usually, like, the music has a subconscious effect on you, and it leads you into places where if you're, as we like to say, if we're hearing it, and it's a very abstract concept, so bear with me. There's playing the music and then there's hearing it. And me personally, like a lot of times, like when I'm playing, if it's right, it's almost like I can hear a recording of what we're playing in my head as we play it, and I know what it ought to sound like. And I try to get to that and use my conscious ability to get to this subconscious thing that I can just kind of hear and feel. I know it should be this, and most importantly, it should not be this. And you try to make room for something great to happen. Because in our music, nothing great can happen if everybody's just stepping all over each other. You have to make room for something hip to go down. Like it won't happen if you push it too much either way. So I don't know, somehow we both could tell that that's what the form of this tune should be. We didn't talk about it. And this is what Greg Clark has a book that's about to come out in, 8-9 months about this. And Kenneth Burke talks about this being like a transcendence. And to me, a transcendence is what just happened because we didn't talk about it. We didn't know that's what it was going to be. We both assumed that it was probably going to be how we typically approach a jazz standard. But something in the music said, not today. And I kind of figured it out as I went along that that's what the form had to be. And then we both were listening for that. And I made room for him, and he made room for me. And the music has a special energy when that's happening. That's not in any other music that I know, because we have to use everything we know about music, the history of it that we can understand, and then you use that, inside of that form. all your virtuosity, all your intelligence, all your emotional feeling. So the things that you can play that somebody might have played on a one-string guitar 5,000 years ago, you might play that, or you might play something that is very, very complicated, and maybe you were studying some Bartok or something a few years ago, and somehow you heard that. So jazz music, it welcomes all of that into it as you approach it individually inside of that group setting.
Marcus, what keeps you, and Loren, Marcus just said, you can do almost anything you want to, anything you feel like doing individualism, inside the form. What keeps you staying inside the form?
Well, we decided to play that beautiful tune by Anne Rennell. So I started it, I mean, I didn't think I was going to, but I started with something that had nothing to do with it, or I mean, not nothing to do with it, but that was kind of outside the tune. Mm-hmm. And then we went, I mean, playing a tune without some kind of format, it's almost like the analogy is playing tennis without a net. I mean, you know, there's a point in having a net to play tennis. You have something to hit the ball over. The form, the structure of the tune that you're playing becomes that form that somehow you have in your mind that somehow you want to get around, over, under, but there has to be something there. And so that's what the form is. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I'm kind of fishing for a particular answer, which I try not to do, but there you go. Let me just, we'll not play the game anymore. Is it because you're agreed to work on a common project? That you're agreed to work, to keep the music working rather than if you go too far, if you go outside the form, the music doesn't happen, right?
Well, yeah, well, the thing is, the bottom line on it is, we want it to sound like jazz music. And for it to sound like jazz music, there has to be a balance between the known and the unknown. And, you know, we knew we were going to start with the pieces in G, right? So we're going to play in G. We know it's slow. We know what the basic mood of it is. We had a basic sort of tempo in mind, even though we were stretching it at times. But once you start, you don't really want to know everything that's going to happen, because that's what makes it significant. That's what makes, even in your life, you know, something that you didn't expect to happen that's really cool. I mean, that's a very enjoyable thing. It doesn't happen all the time. Same is true with jazz. I mean, a lot of times, frankly, jazz is not played very well. That's my real argument, that's why the music is not as popular as it used to be, along with a lot of other variables. But that's one. And so when you step outside of it to the point where you're trying to impose an agenda that's not really tied into where the music is taking you, that's when you start to have trouble. And when we have young jazz musicians, that's a prevalent problem. You know, they'll just start playing stuff that has nothing to do with the key of G, nothing to do with the chord we're on. I mean, all these theoretical things, but they are important, just like writing, okay? You could have a wonderful thought, right? But if you got like a 50-word vocabulary, how much can you write? You know what I'm saying? After 50 words, that's it. So that's why, you know what I mean? So that's why, like in 10th grade, you have like vocab tests like every week, 25 words, you know what I mean? So like, because it's designed to build skills. It's like playing the piano, that's a skill. I mean, it doesn't mean that you're gonna be any kind of musician. It does mean that you will be able to play the instrument, okay? So there's the instrument, but really there's the art, okay? And then there's you, there's what you bring to it. So those three variables, each individual has to bring inside of the environment that they're gonna create with a group. And that's why every jazz group that was great had this individual sound as a group, because everyone's an individual, but then there's somebody who put all that together and said, okay, well, here's what we're gonna do with it. Like Miles Davis, you know, he was a master at that. And then John Coltrane, who played with Miles, he was a master at that. And Thelonious Monk, Duke Ellington, it's a bunch of people. Billie Holiday, who couldn't read music, but she knew what she wanted her music to sound like. And if you listen to Billie Holiday, you're not gonna confuse her with anyone else, if you've ever heard her sing. So I don't know if that addresses...
Process this. Were you?
No, I was just hoping that maybe Marcus will play a solo.
Yeah, well, process this as we hear from Marcus. And think about the question I asked Ashley, what can you take away for getting along? Loren once said something I wish I'd said. He said that when I stole it from him actually, it's on the title, this is part of the title of my book. He said that when he sees jazz performed well, it gives him hope that after all, people really can get along.
like to demonstrate something also. The point I was trying to illustrate was that there you had two different approaches to playing a jazz piece. One was like theme and brilliant variations. The theme, that was the St. Louis Blues, right?
No, no, that's actually a piece I wrote for General Morton that I call Ferdinand Lament, because that was actually his name.
So there you had a theme with beautiful variations, Rococo, Baroque, just right. Swinging, going for broke, variations. And then I went around and I played a tune by Hoagie Carmichael called Stardust, and all I did was play the melody with maybe a total of 17 notes that weren't in the original tune. But yet it was, wouldn't you say that was a jazz performance? But it was the straight melody, 99.9%. So jazz represents both those things and any combination of both those things. Wouldn't it be better, don't you think, if people could just say, I like that kind of music, and not worry so much about the label? Because once you label that you like one thing, then by inference, you're not liking something else. And that's what the record industry, and that's what the music business, and that's what in many ways in our society, when it comes to forget politics or the cereal that you like or the network that you watch, you define yourself by liking one thing, and then you buy into that, and then again, by definition, that means that you're then opposed. Getting back to what Greg said, and I don't want to become the person who talks too much here, so I'll back off in just a moment, but that idea about getting along together. When you see a good jazz performance, you are seeing two people getting along, negotiating a pretty complex environment, and somehow getting along. Think about it from the moment you wake up to the moment that you go to sleep. How many times in the course of a day do you encounter people really getting along? You might not encounter it at work, various times in your life, you might not even find it at home necessarily. You might not find it in the restaurant you go to. You might not find it in the school any number of places. You don't see people getting along well. And that takes a toll after a while. And that's one reason why I think jazz is such a wonderful thing. And I have to also comment, as Marcus did, that talking to Greg these last decade plus, it's been more than a two-way street, because the context that you put these things in and having to do the background to be able to have an intelligent conversation with you has brought a lot to me, and I know in talking with Marcus, it's brought a lot to him too. And so I'm so glad that you put that in the title, so I'm finished.
I think there's more to getting along than what we usually think. Getting along in this sense doesn't mean just not fighting. It means making something together beautiful that you couldn't make alone. And that's the most productive kind of getting along. What do you want to know? Ashley?
Sorry, just another observation. I loved watching Marcus while everyone was playing. Marcus was totally engrossed in it. And he was tapping his foot, and he, maybe he was thinking about what he could play, but he was experiencing what Loren was doing without jumping in and infringing upon that. And I would love for Marcus to play a variation of what Loren did.
Oh my goodness.
Hear his take in his interpretation, what he was thinking about.
Brilliant idea. Walls came tumbling down.
Dave. So far, I know everybody who's raised their hands. That's not good.
I think there's something underlying here we haven't addressed yet, and that's just your intense awareness or familiarity with the instruments. I think this would likely not be in any way possible if you hadn't developed this incredible, again, familiarity with the instruments.
Let's test that out, Marcus. Can I take? I'm kidding.
And I think as we have conversations, as we work through things with each other, we have instruments, right? Things that we develop, and children may not be as adept at dealing with these social conversations we have, and hopefully we as adults develop a capacity with these instruments. Of course, there's still a lot of dissonance, and we don't always agree, but maybe you could speak to this awareness or this familiarity with the instrument, how critical that is to being able to play off of each other.
Well, it's important, but you have to work with what you have. To me, it's more about that. Because even if you're not great at something, it doesn't mean that you can't benefit from interacting with it or interfacing with it. The thing that jazz teaches you is whatever your capacity is. That's why, like in a lot of jazz bands, you have some guys who are real intellectual. Like I used to work with a guy named Todd Williams. He was like that. He was like real, just a very intellectual guy, He played 1 million instruments. He'd be, if you were next to him, like if his room was next to yours, you'd hear him playing like scales, and he'd be practicing all the time. And then there was like a guy that we call Wes Warm Daddy Anderson, who is a great alto saxophonist. And if you want something played with some soul, well, just give it to him, because he'll do that. And it's not to say that he's not intelligent, because he is very intelligent. He taught me countdown at the piano, Coltrane's Countdown, like right before I had to play it that night. He came to the piano and showed it to me at the piano. So the thing is, but he just has such a spiritual sound, such a soul. And then, so the thing is, when you're dealing with young people, kids or teenagers or whatever, the thing that you want to figure out is what speaks to them. And use a combination of what speaks to them, and then a combination of what they need to check out, even though they might not be open to it at the time, that will unlock another part of their identity that they don't even know they have. Because a lot of identity is there already. The question is, what do you want to inform it with? What things are you open to that will change it in the ways that will keep it growing and developing, so that your conversations with people become more substantial. And the more you know and the more comfortable you are with yourself, the easier it is for you to check out another point of view, because you're still secure about who you are and what you know. And when you listen to somebody else, they're just informing your identity with more information. Some of it you'll use, some of it you won't. Count Basie told me that, because I asked him when I met him, I said, well, how did you become Count Basie? Or when did you become Count Basie? He was like, He thought about it for a second. I know he was like, what is this kid talking about? But he thought about it, and he said, I guess I always was. Whatever Count Basie is, he said, I guess I must have been that already. He said, but the thing I did, and I'll never forget this, he said, because he studied with Fats Waller, and he said he took a lot of the information that he got. Like, he listened to a lot of music. He said he learned a lot of music. And he said eventually he started to filter out things that he didn't need to express what he wanted to express. And he said, he told me, he said, you listen to music and you figure out what you need to do what you want to do. He said, but you have to learn a lot to figure that out. And I never forgot that. It was at the intermission of a show he did at Florida State years ago. And he was gracious enough to talk to me. He didn't even know who I was or anything. But he looked at me and said, you play the piano, don't you? I said, yes, sir. And he didn't hear me play one note. He said, yeah, I knew that. I said, yes, sir. And but that is, so all I'm saying is the fact that he even took the time to talk to me and give me such priceless advice that he didn't know. Man, he's probably tired. He's thinking about the next tune they're getting ready to play. But he sees a young guy who's interested, and he thought about when he was 18, when he wanted to study with Fats, and he showed that same type of care and empathy for me. And he had no way to know that I was ever going to really be serious about this or play. So that's why I think it's important that we don't challenge the young people to be like, well, unless you become Thelonious Monk, your identity doesn't have value in music. The thing that music does, it just teaches you how to cooperate. It teaches you how to communicate, teaches you self-expression, how to graduate from that into communication. And in Greg's book, Kenneth Burke talks about ultimately what you want is consummation or transcendence, or something that represents a beauty that no one could have figured out was going to happen. Or as Miles Davis used to always say, if he played 2 perfect phrases in a night, he felt like he had a great night. Because what it takes in music for you to get to those 2 phrases is a lot.
More assessment. Yes. Behind you.
About that, I just was wondering, as you've collaborated over the last decade, you say you've been working together and asking questions. What have you come away with, and how do you approach working with young people, or just even in your concerts? Do you do something differently because of what you have experienced together as you've been asking these questions?
That's for them, right?
Can you put a point on it?
Well, I just wonder how this has changed you, how this project has changed
Oh,
you.
I'm sorry. Okay. You mean this kind of thinking?
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, meeting Greg, somebody who, there's a lot of people in this country, millions and billions, there's all these people. And the fact that jazz, to this day, brings me in contact with really interesting people, all because of this element about thinking about life or thinking about music or what it offers this way. All the time, every year, people come across the transom, so to speak, who seem to share this thing. And so for me, it's been as much of a gift for me personally as me sharing with other people or encouraging young people. I mean, my only thing is that I hope that the only thing I can hope if somebody gets to see me do something is that, there's still hope and you can keep learning and trying to improve what you do. And that's what this has brought me. And frankly, when it comes to Kenneth Burke and rhetoric and all that stuff, I like to learn new things. And so working with Greg and having these discussions as we've been building the Jazz Museum in Harlem, which is a project I've been involved with since for about 12, 13 years, seeing it through Greg's eyes in terms of what his discipline is, has been a great inspiration to us in Harlem with our project, because he's written about it. He comes every year, as much as we can, to bring him in as a visiting scholar, talks to the people in our office and does all this work. So that's what it means to me. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of what the impact has been on me. And I know I said this at the beginning, and I want you to understand it. When I'm sitting off the stage there watching Marcus Roberts play the piano, which I've done a lot over the last 20 some odd years, and saying, this has brought me to a point where I'm on a stage playing with him. So something's right. Thanks, Greg. And I mean that.
No, that's the thing. The experiences that we have are what develop our identity and perspective, and that's, one of the things that I've learned from exploring these topics with Greg, and especially very intensely over the past maybe 6 months. And it's brought me to one clear idea, and that's that in the jazz world itself, like what I'm thinking is we need to apply these concepts ourselves beyond the bands that we create, beyond the groups that we're in, beyond the individual projects that we're doing. And we need to have more of a collaborative agenda for the music, because that's the only way I see that we're ever going to expand the jazz audience, because we're not expanding it. I mean, it's basically the same amount of people that like jazz now as when I came out here in 1985, 1986. So we really haven't grown the audience, really. And I think one of the reasons is because the jazz musicians themselves are guilty of all of the things that we talk about as far as non-democratic behavior. I mean, nobody's thinking about the other guy, which is, I'm doing my thing, I'm playing my music. Really? So what? Okay, good. So is everyone else. So the question, so then, you know what I mean? And then people can tell, like, people can tell, well, they don't seem like they're really, and everybody's somber, and so nobody smiles, nobody's happy. You know, you get on stage, you play. I remember when I first came on the road with Winton years ago, we were just, and I don't know why we were so dark. I mean, we really hadn't been through that much. You know what I mean? You ever see like a young person, they're just dark. Good grief, man, you're like 20, man, what's wrong with you? And, you know, we would walk on stage, and when he wouldn't say anything to the people, we would play this abstract, and I mean, it was abstract, okay? Like, if we played it for you now, I mean, you might like it. But we weren't up there trying to really play for the public or play for the people. Any of the stuff we're talking about now, it was a very self-oriented thing that we were up to. And we thought we were going to impose our will on the society. Well, we lost. We did not. So 25 years later, we're having to look at it and reevaluate and basically come to the conclusion that it's really not for us to impose anything. The only thing we can do is express it, and like I said, present more of a community front and play with each other across the comfort zones that we have. You know, play in each other's groups, play on each other's records. This is how jazz used to be, and I think we have to return to that. And like I say, approach getting along. We basically have the same issues in jazz as the general public has.
My answer to your question is that my ideas that I've developed over the last 12 and 15 years would not have happened without Loren listening to my questions and actually taking them seriously and wanting to talk about it, without Marcus listening to me backstage at the De Young 12 years ago before a show, and I don't know, my questions may have been tedious to him, but that these guys take me seriously and find some value in what I've developed by talking to them is magical to me. You guys take us out?
Sure.
Okay.
What do you want to do?
I don't know. C-Jam or something else.
Oh, no, you don't.
Oh.